And it's a very different experience for a man and a woman, I feel. If a woman is at home, and even an older woman like me, everybody wants a piece of the woman. So people just think that, she's around, so, let me talk to her, let me get instructions from her, let me just walk in and have a chat and things like that. Not too many people are lucky to have big enough homes. And so, people are working out of, the man gets the room, if there is a room that, that you can kind of isolate or use exclusively. And the woman gets the dining table or something like that. And then you have, the children and the servants and the pets and all that coming into the picture.
Hello and welcome to the Filter Koffee Podcast. Did you know that across all companies in the world, only about 19% of the board seats are held by women? In India, it is worse, and only 17%. If you take board chairs, for example, globally, it is less than 5%, which are constituted by women. And if you feel these numbers are getting any better year on year, you'll be wrong. We are down 1% from 2018. Also, more than 50% of working women quit mid-career in India. And if you think this number is better than the Asian average, you'll be wrong again. We are 19% more than the Asian average. And of the women who take breaks mid-career in India, 18% never return back to work. My guest today, Anita Bhogle, breaks down all this and analyzes the reasons behind these very alarming trends in her book, Equal Yet Different. A title which in itself has an interesting backstory related to cricket, which we will explore in just a bit. Anita's book is deeply researched and is based on her in-person conversations with about 100 women professionals across multiple levels in the corporate ladder. This book is packed with research-led data as much as it is with anecdotal evidence. Anita is an IIM Alumni and started her career in advertising and research, and then spent over 2 decades curating a motivational series called Winning Ways, where she and her partner, a certain Harsha Bhogle, helped organizations derive leadership lessons from sports. Anita would then set up BizPundits, India's first video learning library for managers, which was eventually sold to an edtech company. Anita's book, in my opinion, is a must-read for every working woman in this country. I spoke to her about the many phenomena she explores in her book, like career intentionality, the importance of building personal brands, especially for women, and her take on glass ceiling, a term that Anita feels is too simplistic and somewhat even dubious. Stay with us. We'll be right back on the Filter Koffee Podcast. Welcome to the Filter Koffee Podcast. Anita, how are you doing?
Very well. Thank you. Thank you for having me, Karthik.
Are you talking to us from your office?
Yes. I'm in the office. You can see all the books there. I haven't written all those. Just 2 of them are mine. But we have a little office that's very close to home.
Yes. I asked that question because, today we're going to talk about your book, Equal Yet Different. And I think in one of the segments, you speak substantially. I think it's in the work from home segment. You speak substantially about the office and how your family sort of felt about that. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Thanks for the book. This is a subject that I'm generally extremely passionate about as someone who's been pushing for diversity and inclusion in the advertising industry. And I have to say, the book was just like a 2020 game. It was just packed with anecdotes and data points, page after page. Right? There was not a lull moment ever. And,
so happy to hear that.
Yeah,
meant to be an easy read, yes.
It is. But there's just so much in it that I often had to pause and then go for a walk and reflect on it and then come back.
That's the idea. If you see, I've mentioned that in the book that although it's an easy read, I don't want it to be just a quick read where people are looking for, stories or solutions and things like that. I want people to pause and think and reflect. That is the whole objective of the book. So if you did that, I'm so glad.
Absolutely. It totally worked. I want to talk to you about the story of the book, why you wanted to write it, but in just a moment.
Sure.
But I want to talk about the title of the book. right? Which, as you mentioned in one of the earlier chapters, that it is something that taken from a quote of Steve Waugh when he was talking about something else.
Yes.
And it just seems to encompass the spirit of the book so aptly. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Sure. Actually, since the book has been out, the title is the thing that's got the maximum response, with people saying that it's interesting or intriguing or even appropriate. And a lot of women have said that's very appropriate. And that is what I believe, that, equally and different is how women need to be treated and want to be treated. So I believe that, and my research, because I've spoken to a large number of women professionals, corroborates that that is how women really want to be treated. So the title of the book came to me much before the book came. So the title was in my head, or rather not a title, but the term was in my head for a long time, and in this context. So the story really goes back to 2004. Over the last 20 years, my husband Harsha and I have run a motivational series called The Winning Way, which is about learnings from sport for managers. And it was a genre that we really started way back in 2000, this motivational speaking. And subsequently, a lot of people, kind of got into it. But we kind of customized it for every session that we did. Most of the times, people come and tell their own story. So this was different. Anyway, coming back to 2004, we were doing this presentation for a group of senior executives from the Tata Group. And this was in Kolkata. And the presentation went off really well. And at the end of the presentation, a lady named Sangeeta Talwar, who was one of probably 2 or 3 women in that fairly large group, and she came to me and she said, I loved your presentation, but one particular slide kind of stood out for me. And that was this quote from Steve Waugh, where as a leader, he had said, leaders must treat their players equally yet differently. So he really had talked about it in the context that, every team has its non-negotiables, like, hard work and integrity and discipline and things like that. So whether you are a star or you are new recruit, everybody has to follow that. But within that, there are people, the players kind of come from different backgrounds, have different personalities, have different motivations, react to different motivations differently. So in that context, he had said that, you need to be different and you need to handle people differently. But Sangeeta, interestingly, interpreted it from the gender point of view. And she said, this is so appropriate for women, because women want a lot of flexibility, or sometimes, at least in some phases of their lives. But when it comes to performance, you want to be weighed in the same scale as everybody else. So the input might be a little, where you kind of want a little flexibility, but on the output, you just want no concessions at all. And this was like, way back. So much before diversity and inclusion came on the corporate agenda. And I said to myself, I didn't look at it that way, We were just looking at it from the leadership point of view. And so that term stayed with me and came back when I wrote the book. So that's how, equally and different.
You mentioned that the title came to you a few years back. Most of us who know you or who know of you, we've known you as a management consultant, as
That's right.
Someone who's an equal part of Winning Ways, of which I've been fortunate to have a truncated version that you guys have done, and many of that, right? This particular book, when did the motivation to sort of write that come to you? And talk to us a little bit about the journey. You mentioned it took you 2 years. Talk to us a little bit about the journey.
It did. So, this whole issue of not having enough women in leadership positions has been at the back of our minds, and a lot of people have written about it. Like I mentioned to you, the Winning Way we've been doing for over 20 years. And interestingly, when we started, the audiences were mostly people our age. And now, the audiences are younger than even our children. So that was one of interesting things. And so we had to kind of cater our content to the younger generation and also understand the younger generation. The other big difference was that the number of women increased in the audience. And that was a very happy situation. And even in sport, interestingly, you had more women come in. I mean, I remember when we started, all our slides were male. And then you had Saina and Sanya and, all these the women. Yes, everybody, Mary Kom and so many people, so many women. Sindhu more recently, not quite recently, still she's now a senior, yeah.
Right.
and the girls in cricket as well. The cricket team started doing so well. So the whole thing about women came in. Now, interestingly, we had kind of advocated a formula, you could say, for success, maybe, which we used to call the winning triangle. And there we said that, if you had a combination of ability, attitude, and passion, then you were well placed to do well, which means that, ability is really at the bottom of the triangle, because ability, I think, is the most widespread. Contrary to what people think, I think ability has been distributed quite well. Now, those people who kind of combined that ability with good attitude, which means good work ethic, good discipline, being good team players and things like that. Now, those are the people who do better than people who kind of only rely on their ability. And then, you have passion, and you'll see that everybody in every profession, because we said this is a universal formula. So, regardless of what you do or which sector you work in or which industry you work in, this kind of places you in a good position to succeed, this combination of three things. And then over the years, when I started talking to women, and interestingly, women never kind of stood up, hardly ever stood up while the presentation was going on, while the Q&A was going on, but they would always come to me after the presentation and say, have you done anything for women? And do you think this happens? And this is my issue, and that is my issue. And then I realized that women required something a little extra or something a little different. And then when I started thinking about it, it was really about the choices that women made. Because I think even personal choices impact women's careers far more than they impact a man's career. So who you marry, whether you decide to have children or not, how many children, when you are going to have children, all these things, when men get transferred, typically women go with them as trailing spouses. All these things impact a woman's career. And so I just thought, this is an interesting thing. So it really flowed out, equally different, flowed out of the winning way. And that was the starting point, and that's how it happened.
In fact, you talk about how, as your examples also started changing in terms of sports women, the number of women in the audience also started increasing in the winning ways sessions. Even after finishing the entire book, there are many, just like I had this feeling when I read Lean In many years back, there are a lot of terms that just stay with you because they're so apt to describe, which otherwise, you would have taken like a paragraph to do so. And one of them that stayed with me is career intentionality.
Intentionality, yeah. It's a term I have taken from a company named Avatar that does a lot of work in diversity and inclusion. So they work with companies, and I was talking to Dr. Soundarya Rajesh, and she mentioned career intentionality. And so I have given my own interpretation of what I feel is career intentionality. They have scores and things like that, but basically I have said that it's a measure of, the importance and the place of your or a woman's career in her life. Because I think, how seriously you take it and how resilient you are, how ambitious you are, how in control you are. Those are the things that determine how far you will go. A lot of times, intentionality wavers. Because still in our country, when there's pressure, because a woman, manages both home and work, when there's pressure, the job is probably the one that gets sacrificed. Because the stigma that goes with a broken marriage is far, far more than the regret that goes with an aborted career. And so that's the thing that, and so as soon as there's pressure, women seem to throw in the towel. And it's one of the reasons why so many, fall off the corporate ladder. So resilience is very, very important for women, and that they need to work upon, and they need the support to do that as well.
It's so beautifully said. The stigma of a broken marriage often, overweighs a career situation. And I think at the core of this, as I was reading that particular few paragraphs, was that ambition is also not a constant. It's fairly fluid, right? And while it is achievement for women after a certain age, we're talking about, of course, a majority. There are always exceptions to these rules.
Yes.
It becomes work-life balance for women. Right. And it is particularly interesting because career intentionality is often, I feel, whenever I have challenged this, in an organization that I've spoken with, that always comes up as the way by which people justify a glass ceiling and all of that. And also statistics are on their side, which I think, if I remember right, 50% of women probably quit mid-career. And this is close to an India number, I'm assuming, right?
Yes.
So I think once, what I took away from that paragraph is that once you wear this lens, that ambition is sort of transient in nature, it's easy to understand what the motivations for a woman are.
But while I'd like to tell women about, just hanging in, which I have, I think it's equally important to tell organizations that this is a kind of a temporary phase. And if there is, some understanding or some hand-holding or some flexibility given, then I think, women can tide over this phase. You needn't sacrifice a whole career just because, a lot of times you go through temporary stress at home over domestic issues. So there's learning there for companies as well.
Yeah. I think the other thing that you talk about a lot is also on conditioning, right? And I think this is something you speak about in various parts of the book, from families to how we are brought up and all of that. One particular incident that you talk about sort of stayed with me, which is the incident with Matthew Mott, who's a coach, the Australian coach who usually coached men's sides, and then he goes on to coach a women's team. And then he talks about how some of the things that he says generically are taken differently by a men's team instead of a women's team. Rather than me spoil this, can you just elaborate on this a little bit?
Sure. So what he said is, he's trained both male and female teams, and obviously many more male teams. And so he used to speak to the team in the dressing room, maybe. And whenever he used to talk to them, the feedback was different from how it was with women, because women, I think, take feedback very personally and very seriously. So if he said that this needs to be done, every woman in the room would think, yes, this is for me and I need to do it. Whereas every man would think, oh, he's giving advice to the idiot next to me. It's not for me. It's a general advice that I needn't take personally. So that was the difference. And I think there's a big learning in that for leaders who now lead, large and diverse teams, that like equally and different. The same thing that, what Steve Waugh said, that, people respond to your feedback differently. And therefore, you need to treat people that way, and you need to communicate with them as well. And the other learning there, I think, is that just because women react differently doesn't make them less equal. That is really the problem, because I think when you are in a minority, and that works for all minorities in any society, there is a lot more scrutiny, there is a lot more criticism. And people start thinking that because the rules are made for the majority, the minority either needs to kind of, fit in, make the effort to fit in, or they are the oddballs. Even if you look at leadership, for example, the default leadership model is male. You close your eyes and you say the word leader, you think about authority, you think about, people listening to the leader, you think about the leader being loud and giving instructions, even arrogant sometimes. And that somehow works for the men, but doesn't work for the women. And so that is the piece that needs to be understood, that, just because you're different doesn't mean that you are less equal. And organizations really need to therefore accept and acknowledge diversity and understand diversity and embrace it, because research all over the world has consistently pointed out to the fact that diverse teams are happier teams, are more productive teams, are in a better position to take decisions. And so diversity is something that is the preferred option, should be the preferred option, not something that people just need to comply with, or it's a good thing to do in today's time. It sounds good.
Yeah. And when I sit in meetings and panel discussions on diversity and inclusion, a lot of it seems to be the physical constitution of different genders and people in a room or in a meeting or in a board or in an organization. What you just said, these are all behavioral aspects of diversity and inclusion.
Yeah,
it very rarely gets discussed in organizations.
Absolutely. If you have half the room full of women and nobody's going to open their mouth or nobody's going to listen to them, what have you achieved? Nothing, right? The whole idea in having diversity is that, you have different viewpoints, you have different ways of thinking. Like I like to say, heterogeneous teams are the ones where learning is maximum. Because if everybody comes from the same kind of background, with the same kind of thought process, then I don't see how the discussion is going to be vibrant. I think even the IIMs are trying to do that, have diverse classrooms because they want better discussions. If all your 98% of your class is good at quant or male engineers, let's say, then everybody is going to think the same way, right? So we want more diversity. We want more different ideas, and especially since your consumers are becoming so global and diverse and mixed marriages and things like that. That's the way society is going, and therefore you need to have teams also that reflect that.
Yeah, because one of the things that came out, right, and again, you talk about this in various parts of the book, there is an inherent self-doubt in the woman's mind, and that's a subset of conditioning at multiple different levels. And, that self-doubt is often misinterpreted as, lack of confidence, lack of conviction, or anything else, right? So I was wondering, should managers and leaders be aware enough, to deploy different scales, when they judge the response of two different leaders, one male and one female? Would you advocate that sort of an approach? Because I think the more you judge them by the same scales, you tend to make those mistakes.
No, maybe you should just nudge them. Nudge them to kind of, say a little more and things like that. So I think I've written about this. We had a women from IIMs get together a few years ago. So maybe 5-6 years ago. And that was the first time, we had women over there. And people discussed issues and how things haven't changed. I mean, many things have changed, but a lot of things need to change. And I remember there was a woman who worked for a VC fund. She said, it's very frustrating because you have a lot of women with brilliant ideas, but if we give them 30 minutes time to talk about themselves and their ideas, they can't take up the 30 minutes. Whereas men just go on and on and on. And that's a big differentiate scene. So they just shy away from talking about themselves. And let me tell you another interesting story. After I wrote the book, I got a call from a woman. I got a message actually from a woman from an IIM. She kind of said, I'd like to connect. And I thought it was regarding her startup. She's an entrepreneur, a young woman. And she reached out to me. And then when she called, she told me she'd read the book. And then she started telling me about herself. And so she was from a similar family like mine, 2 daughters. But the father, and the father worked for the government. They grew up in a government colony, played with boys. The father, taught them to ride bikes, motorcycles, both the daughters. And the parents said that, you apply for the IIT first. If you don't get in, then you give the CET and try for a local college, which is quite the opposite of what most girls are told, that look for something that's close by so you don't have to go too far away and things like that. And I was so happy to hear the story that, the parents were not only supportive, but also very ambitious. There's a difference there. Not only supportive, but very ambitious for their 2 daughters. And then suddenly she threw the bombshell and she said, I read your book and you talked about so many limiting behaviors. That women can't negotiate well, they can't stake a claim to work. You'll never catch a woman saying, why am I not part of this project? I should have been on this. Why am I not getting the promotion? Very few. I mean, the younger ones are getting a little better at that, but still largely you don't find that. So those are what I call limiting behaviors. And she said, I identified with every one of them. So try and help me understand why that happened. Not only that, she applied for VC funding and she said those people laughed at me because the girl had an IIT, IIM and a major consultancy experience. And yet she put that as point number 7 in her deck. And they laughed at her and she said, these are the things that we back, right? The person with the idea and the background and the experience. And she had put it at point number 7. So it runs deep. This conditioning runs very, very deep. The self-doubt, and probably comes from the patriarchal kind of system that we are all products of, where women were typically, supposed to please everybody, do things for everybody, never got appreciated. You would have heard this, that women don't take compliments well. They don't know where to look when people compliment them because it's not been done often enough. So these are the kind of behaviors that run deep. And we just need to kind of encourage people to understand those and support women in and nudge them a little bit. I wouldn't say give them some kind of flexibility, because I don't think that's what women want, and I don't think it'll work because men don't like that. It's inconvenient for people. And in a sense, it's fair because we're trying to reverse things that, their earlier generations did. It's not really their fault, right? It's like reservation in a way. I wouldn't advocate that. Ideally, not.
That for another day's discussion.
Yes.
But what you just said about the patriarchal mindset.
Sure.
By the way, before I go into even that, the putting IIT IIM and in number 7, that hit me hard, because I lived in Delhi for about 11 years up until a few months back. And there is a brand of milk, where every day I get the packet of milk and it says this company is run by an IIT IIM graduate, as though that's supposed to make the milk better.
Yeah, what the joke is, right? How do you know a person is from an IIT and IIM? They tell you that in the first 5 minutes.
Right. Going back to the patriarchal mindset, that's very close, to my own story, because I grew up in a family of 2 siblings, me and my elder sister. And my sister was a far, far better student than I was. And when she got through in BITS Pilani, my dad wouldn't send her for whatever reasons, right? And the irony is that he really wanted me to travel and study in distant universities, but I wasn't good enough, right? That stays with me. Of course, she being smart enough, she figured it out, and she did better in her career than I did. But that's the story. That was a very true reality. It's not like the world came to a halt when he did that, right? It happened and everyone moved on.
I know. My father told me, and I was a maths physics kind of a student, and did very well in school and college, and topped in statistics and physics subsequently in college. But when it came to appearing for the JEE in those days, my father said, first of all, you're just too young to go and live away for 5 years. In those days, it used to be 5 years, right? The only IIT he'd heard of was Powai, and even that was like back off beyond, given that we lived in Mumbai. And then he said, I don't have the money to set up some factory or something like that, and so you will end up in the PWD. But my father was from the government. He had absolutely no exposure to the private sector, and that was his understanding of what engineering jobs were about. So I don't hold it against him. But somewhere I get the feeling that maybe if I were a boy, he would have tried harder to find out a little more.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you live and go on. Like we all did.
Since we're talking IMA, I had this personal observation that I've been teaching in this institution called MICA, which is one of the leading institutions when it comes to marketing and communications, for about 8 years now. And especially the last 5 to 6 years, almost half or sometimes even more of the people who signed up for my course, which is on content marketing, are women. And recently I was just going through the general numbers in the advertising industry. We had a workshop, a DEI workshop. We were doing that. And in the communications industry, at the entry level, there are more women than men. It's actually 55-45, right? And then it sort of tapers, and then at a mid-management level, right, like say 6-7 years of work experience, it's sort of at the same level, right? And then it starts to decline. But at the very top, when you're looking at executive committees and leaderships and CEOs, etc., it is such a steep drop. It comes down to about from 25% to like a 7-8%, which is extraordinarily telling. And I know that you didn't look like you were a fan of the term glass ceiling because you feel it oversimplifies many things. But there is certainly something that is going on. And I wanted you to talk about this a little bit more, because you also talk about a time when you went to IMA in 85, where there were, if I remember right, only 9 out of 180 students were women, right? How do you sort of process these numbers?
Well, it angers me. It angers me more because I don't think too many things have changed. And I've seen a lot of very, very talented, very ambitious women, who've had to compromise. Now, my own story is a little more unusual, so I don't want to bring my story into it. But when I look at, a lot of people who have married batchmates, whether it's like from B schools or from who are doctors or architects or, whatever. In my generation, I think it was understood or accepted maybe that women had to kind of take the back seat because women kind of took over all the domestic responsibilities. Like my husband likes to say, they got the best of both generations. So they got working wives, intelligent sounding boards and all that. But they also got somebody who ran the home efficiently and things like that. And I say to him, so what did you do about it? You just accepted it with open arms and said, okay, I got the best of both worlds. But that doesn't help in changing the situation. So I don't know how you process it. You just feel bad about it. And I really have given it a lot of thought. Because, there was a time when I was heading a department and we had 7 offices, but I couldn't travel. And yet they were so sweet about it. There was a time when all, top media heads were women. And then suddenly they just got wiped out. And I don't know whether it is to do with the fact that media suddenly became big bucks. First it used to be only media planning. So it was about reach and viewership and all that. And then suddenly it became about deals and sponsorships and things like that. That's my own take, and I don't know whether that's true or not. But it happened around the same time, and I feel that being networked and getting these deals out and being more cutthroat is something that probably marginalized the women when it became more business than analysis.
Right. I probably also left that question at a very higher point than I intended. What I mean is at some level, what I'm understanding from this number is, and as you know, advertising and communication, it's an example, is a very client-facing business. It's a services industry. And I just can't wrap my head around the fact that organizations feel that they're good enough to build products, to manage projects, to build great relationships with clients, to bring in credibility. But when it comes to running an organization, that's where the ratio falls.
Yeah.
Right? And that I find extraordinarily difficult to believe, because in a way, I've always felt like women are more natural leaders because they used to sort of a consensus-led leadership, whether it is a family or a community, so on and so forth. But that's where, really, really puzzles me as to
but
why
nobody gives women the credit that they are great multitaskers or that they are natural leaders. Yeah. That is not appreciated really as a skill. I also find that, women now, since you asked me this question again, women seem to focus only on their functional skills, which is probably what happened with media. They were very good planners, but, finally the business became more about the bigger picture, understanding the business, understanding which brands are likely to kind of come and sponsor something in cricket, making that brand connection and things like that, which typically maybe somebody in media didn't get at that point in time. And so other people jumped in.
Yeah.
Women often don't have the time to do this investment. And that's another point that I've kind of, written about in the book, because unless you have those other skills, you get disqualified for leadership, because unless you are networked, unless you are a great communicator, unless you've kind of, ticked all the right boxes, done a P&L, for example, taken a P&L responsibility, you don't become a business leader. So if you've only done analysis and, you just done planning, but you really don't know how the business overall runs, then you can't be a great leader. I mean, you might be a natural leader, but you get disqualified from leadership roles. How many women have set up advertising agencies, you ask? Tara Sinha?
You can count in one hand. Yeah.
Preeti Vyas, I guess. Or more a design thing, I guess. But hardly anybody, right?
Yeah.
So that's probably the answer.
Yeah. You spoke about networking, and there's a very interesting segment in the book where I think one of the people that you spoke to talks about smoking. And it's a very interesting and also a very concerning part of our industry, right? And I think this is across categories, not just in communications. Much of these decisions, much of these bonds are formed, when you're out for a drink, when you're down, smoking.
Or discussing sport.
Or discussing sport.
These are 3 things, yeah.
Even as a person myself, I'm not naturally someone who smokes. And I found myself, probably doing that. And I realized that as I was reading a book, I found probably myself doing that because I didn't want to miss out on an important conversation, right? So I would be a part of that. And in the case of women, again, there's no scale of men versus women when it comes to smoking. I think that's universal.
Except that women bear children and are always conscious of the fact that if you smoke, then it's not good for the child. That's a big difference. Yeah.
And they're also less stupid than men when it comes to health.
That I'm not so sure about.
In that, you sort of talk about how, that becomes this burden. And you talk about this one person who speaks to you, who says that she had to do this simply because she didn't want to miss out, right? That was extraordinarily concerning. This chapter that I'm talking about, it also is in a segment where you're talking about the importance of women building brands, right? Which actually then talks back to the previous question that we were discussing. I wanted to ask you, while you discuss this elaborately in the book, for young women who are listening to this, for aspiring leaders who are listening to this, if you want to tell them, 2 or 3 takeaways in terms of building their brand or investing in themselves, what would they be?
I think before investing, women need to dream aloud, which means that they need to have a dream. A lot of times, you think, I don't know who I'm going to marry. I don't know where I'll go. I don't know where I'll settle down. And so I'm not sure whether I'll be able to do something. And traditionally, I think women haven't been encouraged to dream. Yeah, even today, if you look at advertising, it's all about looking pretty, looking attractive. There are a few ads that talk about confidence and things like that. But I think even emotions need to be encouraged. So women need to be told that, or projected as somebody who's confident, about independent, being financially independent, and you don't need other people to kind of support you. Dreaming aloud and sharing it with others. When I say sharing your ambition, it means because you need the support. You can't do it alone. And everybody comes back and says that you need support unless you do that. I was listening to a talk by some conversation with Neena Gupta. She also said that, her father came and supported her and she couldn't have done it without that kind of support. So unless you tell people that this is what I want to do and I want you to be part of my dream, it doesn't happen. So that's the first thing. The other is about investing in yourself, because typically women are so burnt out between these responsibilities, that home and work, that, you don't typically invest in these kind of things like we discussed earlier about networking, for example. And networking is becoming so important now. Visibility is becoming so important now in this world, in today's world. And I think it's going to be even more, because if you look at the gig economy and, everybody's talking about it, then you need a presence in social media. You need to be known for your work. You need to put yourself out there. And if you are inhibited, or if you're not seen in the right kind of places, then you're not going to be top of mind. So if you want to be a personal brand, you have to do all these things. That, you update your CVs, you write about your work, you go and meet the right people, tell them about your work. Typically, women don't talk about their work as well, or, they can't showcase their work. So that is something one needs to do. Also, communication. When there's a presentation and the question of who's going to make the presentation, you need to put your hand up early and keep practicing that, so that by the time you become a leader, you are good enough. So you have to build in these skills, and which is why I say you have to invest in them, because maybe they don't come naturally. Maybe they're not taught it in schools and colleges. You need to invest in those things and also make, smart career choices. Not just depending on convenience, what is manageable. That's a huge mistake. That I can manage this as of now, so I'm going to, focus on that. Not think about what's going to be great on my CV or what's going to be great for my career or where the opportunities are. So that's another change, I would say. Another takeaway is marry the right guy. That still remains the biggest decision. The guy can be a hurdle or he can be a huge enabler as well. And I think people need to think about that.
Yeah. In fact, you talk about in the chapter called Tripping on Guilt, you talk about, marriage and motherhood and all of these things. I think what you just said is, I'm assuming, extremely critical. Right?
It is.
More so because I feel in the question of, again, something else you tackle beautifully in the book, which is the question that many mothers have, which is, am I a good enough mother? And I'll give you a personal anecdote. So both me and my wife works in the not-for-profit sector, and we both travel a lot, and we have a 6-year-old daughter. As I speak, she's contemplating, without going into too much detail, whether she should take a break, to ensure that she gets her time, our daughter gets her time, because she feels infinitely guilty about the fact that she feels she's not there for her as much as she wants to. Right? It's a cross that I think many mothers bear at a much, much bigger extent than what's happening in our lives.
So every single woman that I spoke to asked herself this question.
How are they handling it?
I think you need other women to tell them that this is temporary and that it will pass. Every woman I spoke to has asked herself this question: am I a good enough mother? Sometime or the other. Not have I been a good wife. Isn't that interesting? But everybody has asked this thing about being a good mother. I think the bond is far stronger. After all, there is the umbilical cord. I also feel that children have a way of making you feel guilty. that, so and so came for the school meeting and you didn't come. So and so's mother does this and you don't do it. And obviously, it's not possible for women in responsible positions to do all that. Because as it is, women are having children late, and then by the time the children grow up and start speaking and saying all these things, you are in a fairly senior position, so you can't always do that. But I think they need other women to tell them that don't worry, they turn out absolutely okay. And there is no research that shows that children whose mothers stay at home turn out better or more secure or anything like that. So that is one of the things. The other thing I feel strongly about is that women need to tell their children as well as the rest of the family about how important their work is to them as well as to the organizations that they work for. That they are staying away from home to do, to contribute significantly to something. And that is going to make a difference to other people or to the company and whatever. Their income is also helping them have a better lifestyle. And therefore, it is not only for themselves that they are working, but they are working for the family, and that they are doing intelligent work and they need to do that for themselves. So you need to make them part of your dream as much as you are part of their dreams. And mothers are a huge part of a child's dream, and there's no reason why children should not be a part of mother's dream. You should be proud of them.
That's so beautifully put. Yeah. You also talk about how important it is to sort of manage your finances very well, be on top of it. Can you give a shorter version of why that is very critical in these larger scheme of things that we're talking about?
I think it's a life skill. Managing money is a life skill. So if you've learned to be financially independent, you should be able to manage your own money. So that is one thing. And be in control of your own money. Sadly, women decide that's one of the things you can kind of outsource to the husband, because the rest of it you can't. Your own work, your home and whatever somehow is their own domain. And so money is something that they ask husbands to manage. Whether they do a better job or not is, or whether they're qualified or not is not the issue. Just give it to them, trusting them this. Unfortunately, a lot of marriages go sour these days. And then, suddenly a lot of women feel that, they are not in control and they don't know what to do and they've never handled it. So, which is why I say it's a life skill. So, whether you're in a good relationship or not, you should be able to manage your own money. Yeah. That's basically
it. In fact, I have a slightly delayed recollection, which dates back to the previous question more than what I just asked you. We spoke about mothers and children being a part of their dreams, etc. But somehow, I always feel that from the popular public discourse, the father is fairly and conveniently missing in this, right? It made me think, there's one of the campaigns that for the longest time I used to love. It's a campaign by Procter & Gamble. It's called Thank You Mom. And it was actually launched, if I'm not wrong, during the London Olympics, where it speaks about behind every athlete who succeeds, there's a mother who's getting up at 4 o'clock and 5 o'clock. And I'm just now thinking, and I've been thinking about this for a few years. Well, the campaign was done with great intention, right? But the entire thing on mothers it's doing more harm than good, because it's making it part of, a mother's duty to sort of do that. It's sort of glorifying that, right? Yeah. So I noted it down as a point. I want to ask you about this.
Yeah. So like they say, and a lot of women talk about this, that, in India, a woman is either a Devi or a Dasi. We just want to be normal human beings. So appreciation is good, but not enough. If you remember, and since you've read the book, there's a term in my book called mentally feminist.
Yeah.
What it means really is, and it's not only the men who are mentally feminist, even women can be mentally feminist. We like to say that we are feminist. So we say all the right things, we press all the right buttons. You'll find husbands saying, oh, I'm very appreciative of what my wife does, I'm very supportive, and I'm very proud of her work. But if you ask them, do you share the load? Do you give her time to invest in herself? That doesn't happen. So this is something like that. You say all the right things, oh, thank you, very good, without you, we couldn't have done it, etc., etc. But that doesn't really help the mother. You're just reinforcing this thing that she just needs to sacrifice for the family. And that is exactly what women are doing. When there is an issue at home, the woman has to give up her job. That is what you're reinforcing in a way. So it's nice to be appreciated. I'm not saying it's not. But if you see what it's doing for women, it may not be good enough.
May not be good enough, and probably even more harm.
Yeah.
I think
the stereotype becomes stronger.
Yeah. Stronger. Yeah. Anita, I started the episode by talking to you about, by asking you whether you're in your office, because there is this segment in the book where you talk about working from home.
Yes.
And you talk about how, when you and Harsha sort of set up this office many, many years back. Was that your father-in-law, Bappa?
Yes, my father. But this is not the home office. This is an office we've had for the last 9 years or so, which is in the next compound, but still close enough to be able to run home anytime you need. Yeah.
Yeah, he had a lot of questions back then, which you said were very prevalent today, in the post-pandemic sort of an era. But my question to you was, and I thought this is probably a more appropriate place to close our conversation, which is, we did a lot of episodes during the pandemic, especially with a lot of leaders who are women, about what work from home has been like for women, right? And it's been pure hell, especially the first lockdown, where, it was not as simple as work from home for them, because they had to manage multiple things, which became exponentially more difficult if everyone stayed at home.
Yes,
and then
I was cooking 3 meals a day for 5 people. We were in the red zone right from the beginning, and it was so difficult. So you had to, of course, the others also kind of chipped in, but the pressure was all on the woman because, cooking itself, and there's no help at all. And so you had to cook for everybody. So that was difficult. Then I think slowly people started settling down and then working from home. And I've had clients saying that, women want to take a sabbatical because they just can't seem to manage. It was very tough on women who had young children later on, when online classes started, because they had to supervise all that. And it's a very different experience for a man and a woman, I feel. If a woman is at home, and even an older woman like me, everybody wants a piece of the woman. So people just think that, she's around, so, let me talk to her, let me get instructions from her, let me just walk in and have a chat and things like that. Also, not too many people are lucky to have big enough homes. And so, people are working out of the man gets the room, if there is a room that, that you can kind of isolate or use exclusively. And the woman gets the dining table or something like that. And then you have, the children and the servants and the pets and all that coming into the picture. And while it was very cute in the beginning that, little kids coming around or pets, then after that, people stopped appreciating that. So you need discipline to work from home. And I can tell you that. And you need to kind of recreate the office situation. So that, especially for women, I find, because, women have this switch in their head, which is 2 modes, home and office. And so it's easier when you step out and then you switch off from here, and then you kind of, you don't switch off totally, but at least, in principle. But when you're at home, that switch doesn't work. And it's a difficult experience because people expect you to be on call all the time. So while it throws up a lot of opportunities, it's not that easy. It can be very challenging.
Yeah, especially for the women.
Especially for the women.
And I feel one of the things you sort of mentioned in passing, but not spoken about in detail is the number of people and the kind of women you've spoken to, to write this book. From Falguni to some of the people we discussed. Like Sandhya Rajesh and hundreds of them, I'm assuming. What has been the response to the book? Because I'm assuming at your end, it must have started a lot of conversations and a lot of people seeking you out, to share their stories with you. Talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing as the impact of the book.
Yeah, firstly, I spoke to about 90 women. So mostly face-to-face or on Zoom and some on mail. And I must say that, everybody responded very positively. I was lucky, of course, to have access to a lot of people who have kind of achieved something, because I really wanted to look at what they had done right and whether they had any kind of, suggestions for younger people. And they were very generous and very candid. And some of the stories are really moving. I've had to mask a lot of names or, because some of them were just too personal. So they trusted me enough. And so I got out a lot of stories. I got the feeling that, it's a dam that's about to burst. That women are ready to take on the world, but somehow they just, families, societies, men in particular, are not really ready they haven't changed as much. And so it was a very emotional experience for me as well as for other people who were kind of responding to my questions. A lot of them enjoyed the conversation as well, because there are many topics that, Nobody had asked them before, and it really made them think about how they had handled their own lives and careers. So definitely that was there. That brings me again to what you said right in the beginning, that it made you think, and that is what I want from the book. That people start thinking about their old mindsets, and whether it's really time that people revisited them, reconsidered them. And I don't blame anybody. So if you see, I have not really pointed fingers at anybody, because everybody has grown up in the same patriarchal mindset. So if your mother tells you that, you are God's gift to mankind, I don't blame you for believing that you are, right? Like you said, your sister didn't get the opportunity and you did. Somewhere that stays in your subconscious. In families where there are only daughters, if the parents say things like, I wish I had a son, that automatically makes you feel that you're not good enough. So these are kind of messages that, we grow up with. And so we need to kind of unlearn a lot of those things. So I believe that the way forward is sensitizing people, making them aware. Because a lot of times, I've spoken to audiences and people there say, oh, I never thought about it like that. I never realized that this was what I was doing. That is the kind of response I want, because it means that people are thinking, not just look at it and have no response at all. Even if there's pushback, that's good response, because it means that, people are thinking. So I feel that it's not activism that is required, but, sensitization. That will change the world.
That's a brilliant last line to close this episode.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the book. I wish you all the success, and looking forward to more from you. Thanks so much for your time, Anita.
Thank you for inviting me.
If you like this podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcasts.com. You can also follow us on our social media. We are at IVM Podcasts on Twitter and Instagram. And if you want to reach out to me, I am _Karthik. That's Karthik with an H on Twitter. And Filter_Koffee, it's coffee with a K, on Instagram.